So imagine like you're a logger, right,
Sure.
in Vermont,
Okay.
and you're dealing with warmer winters than usual,
Yeah.
muddy springs, and then to top it all off, more and more extreme weather.
Uh-huh.
How do you, as a logger, how do you change the way you do things
Yeah.
to protect the environment,
Right.
but also, to protect like your way of making a living?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're going to, kind of dig into today.
Dive into today
Yeah,
on the FBS podcast.
exactly. The FBS podcast.
Yeah.
And
That's a challenge.
go on, sorry.
That's a challenge that people are facing beyond Vermont,
Oh, yeah.
especially, for those of us in the forest products industry.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And we're looking at how Vermont loggers are using something called acceptable management practices,
Okay.
or AMPs,
Yeah.
to kind of address these challenges.
AMPs.
Yeah.
Okay.
And these guidelines are designed to protect water quality during, logging operations.
And they're becoming more and more important.
Oh, absolutely.
As climate change throws more curveballs our way.
Throws more curveballs, yeah, for sure. We're going to really kind of explore the specifics of these AMPs and how they're changing
Uh-huh.
and why they matter for, for folks like you, mid-career professionals.
Yeah.
After all, that's part of the FBS podcast mission.
Right.
Is to give you the knowledge and insights you need to, to navigate your career.
Exactly.
With all these changes happening.
Yeah. And in this case, understanding how to adapt to a changing climate.
Yes.
And also uphold, the highest standards of environmental stewardship.
Stewardship, yeah. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly are these AMPs and how do they come about?
Well, AMPs are similar to what many other states call best management practices, or BMPs.
BMPs, okay.
They basically lay out guidelines for conducting logging operations in a way that minimizes the impact on water quality.
Okay, so minimizing that impact.
Right.
And in Vermont, they're not just like suggestions anymore.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, they started out as voluntary guidelines,
Right.
but over time they've become mandatory for properties that are enrolled in Vermont's current use program.
So that means a big chunk, right? A significant portion of Vermont's private forest land
Yeah,
is now managed under these AMPs.
that is correct.
Wow.
Yeah, and that shift from voluntary to mandatory
Yeah.
really reflects a growing recognition of the importance of protecting water resources, especially with climate change.
Especially in the face of climate change, yeah. Now, I'm curious about this this evolution that you're talking about. How have AMPs gone from being seen as just like another regulation
Yeah.
to being like a vital tool for sustainable forestry?
It's a really interesting shift. Initially, there was some resistance.
Yeah.
Some in the industry were viewing AMPs as a burden.
Okay, I can see that.
But as climate change started to become more noticeable,
Yeah.
warmer winters, less consistent freezing ground, more precipitation during harvesting seasons,
Wow.
the industry began to see the value, the practical value of these practices.
Oh, so it's almost like climate change forced the industry to take it seriously.
In a way, yeah.
Okay.
The industry realized that protecting the environment wasn't just about compliance.
Yeah.
It was about ensuring the long-term health of the forests.
Right, because that's their livelihood.
That's their livelihood, exactly.
And I imagine those changing weather patterns that you mentioned, warmer winters, less consistent frozen ground, more precipitation.
Right.
I imagine those played a huge role in highlighting the need for these protective measures.
Absolutely, yeah. Warmer winters, for example, mean less reliable frozen ground,
Right.
which makes it harder to operate equipment without causing soil disturbance and erosion. And AMPs provide guidance on how to deal with those challenges.
So it sounds like these AMPs address both the environmental and the operational challenges
That's right.
that are brought about by climate change. So let's get into some details, like what are some examples of these AMPs in action?
Okay, so AMPs cover a range of practices, both structural and behavioral.
Okay, let's break those down. What are some examples of structural AMPs?
Structural AMPs, those are the ones that involve like physical improvements,
Right.
that kind of minimize environmental impact.
Oh,
And a good example is like crushed stone roads.
okay, crushed stone roads.
Yeah, these help stabilize the roads, reduce erosion, prevent sediment from washing into streams.
Oh, okay, so especially during those heavy rains.
Exactly, yeah. Which are, we're seeing more and more of those with climate change.
Right, right.
So it's not just, using any old road.
Yeah.
It's using specific materials and construction techniques that are designed to,
To handle it.
Handle it, exactly.
Yeah.
Another example is reinforced culverts.
Reinforced culverts, okay.
So these are structures that allow water to flow under roads and trails. And by reinforcing them, they can handle the increased water flow, with the heavier precipitation.
Yeah.
And it helps prevent, washouts
Washouts?
that could send sediment into waterways.
Right. It seems like a lot of planning goes into these structural AMPs.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And then you mentioned behavioral AMPs.
Right.
Those are about adjusting, like, the practices
Yeah,
to minimize impact.
exactly.
What are some examples of those?
So one is timing harvests for, optimal ground conditions.
Okay.
Traditionally, loggers might have operated year-round, but with warmer winters, the ground might not freeze, as consistently or as deeply.
Yeah.
And that makes it, more susceptible to rutting and compaction from the heavy equipment.
So you got to be more strategic about when you harvest.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about minimizing the impact.
On the soil.
On the soil, right?
Okay.
Another behavioral AMP is dividing harvests into phases to, align with those drier periods. So you might harvest a portion of a stand during a dry spell,
Okay.
let the ground recover, and then come back later and harvest the rest.
That's a cool way to adapt.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not just about reacting to the weather. It's about being proactive.
Proactive. Okay.
Yeah, like AMPs encourage preemptive installation of erosion control measures, like seeding and mulching exposed soil before harvesting even begins.
So you're kind of like taking those preventive measures to minimize the problems later on.
Exactly. Yeah, you're thinking ahead.
Yeah.
And another crucial aspect of, behavioral AMPs is seeking technical assistance from AMP foresters.
AMP foresters.
Yeah, these are the experts,
Oh, okay.
They can provide guidance on how to implement AMPs effectively.
So it's not just about following the rules.
Right.
It's about having those experts help you out.
Exactly. You need that expertise to tailor those practices to each site.
Because each site is different.
Exactly. It's a collaborative approach.
I like that.
Yeah, recognizing that, every logging operation is different.
Yeah.
And you need that expert advice sometimes.
Okay, now let's talk about water quality.
Okay.
That seems to be like, the main focus of AMPs.
Right.
Why is that such a priority, and how do these practices actually address water quality?
Protecting water quality is super important. And the impact of logging, on streams, rivers, all those water bodies is a big concern.
Okay, so how do AMPs address that?
Well, one of the main things is minimizing soil disturbance near streams.
Oh.
And this is done, through a mix of structural and behavioral practices.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. So AMPs require leaving forest buffers along waterways.
Forest buffers, okay.
Yeah, these are basically like undisturbed strips of forest.
Oh, okay, I see.
They act as natural filters. They absorb runoff, prevent erosion, and they keep the water temperatures cool.
Oh, that's important for the fish.
Exactly. Yeah, it's important for aquatic life. And the width of these buffers, depends on the slope of the land.
So a steeper slope needs a wider buffer.
Exactly. Yeah, you need that extra protection.
To prevent erosion.
Right. And another key thing is the proper installation of temporary stream crossings.
Temporary stream crossings.
Yeah, so when logging operations need to cross streams, they have to use temporary structures like bridges or culverts or even pole fords.
Pole fords, what's that?
It's like a series of logs laid across the stream.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and AMPs require that these crossings are properly sized and installed to handle the water flow and minimize disturbance to the stream.
That makes sense. Are there any other measures to protect the stream during these crossings?
Yeah, AMPs require seeding and mulching of exposed soil
Okay.
near those crossings to prevent erosion.
Okay, so that bare soil doesn't just run off.
Right.
Anything else?
Another important thing is controlling the storage and handling of petroleum products and hazardous materials.
Oh, right.
To prevent spills and contamination. And this is especially important with climate change because we're seeing, more extreme weather events.
Those heavy rains and floods.
Exactly. And those can increase the risk of spills.
Reaching the waterways.
Right. So it's about anticipating those risks and being proactive.
Yeah.
And all of these practices work together to minimize the impact on water quality, which is essential for the environment and for the industry.
So it sounds like a pretty comprehensive approach.
It is.
Addressing everything from like the infrastructure to the day-to-day practices.
Yeah.
Now, what about enforcement? How are these AMPs monitored? And what happens if there are violations?
Okay, so the Vermont Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation. They're responsible for monitoring AMPs.
Okay.
And investigating complaints.
And what are some of the most common violations?
Most violations involve discharges of sediment or debris into waterways.
Okay.
Often it's from improper installation or maintenance of stream crossings or inadequate erosion control.
So the protective measures weren't enough.
But it's interesting because the focus isn't just on punishment.
Oh, so it's not just about fines.
Right. It's more about education, technical assistance, and a graduated response to non-compliance.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So when a violation is found, the first step is usually to work with the logger or the landowner
Okay.
to understand why it happened
Okay.
and provide guidance on how to fix it.
So it's about finding a solution,
Exactly.
not just penalizing the person.
Right. The goal is to prevent future violations
Mm-hmm.
by making sure everyone understands the importance of these practices
Yeah.
and how to do them right.
So it's a more collaborative approach
That is.
than just, coming down hard on people
Right. It's about building trust and working together.
to protect the water.
Exactly.
Okay, now we got to talk about the money side of things.
Right.
Loggers are facing economic pressures,
Mm-hmm.
which can make it tough to comply with these standards.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it shows that we need to support the industry to help them balance, making money and being environmentally responsible.
Right, because those shouldn't be at odds with each other.
Exactly.
What are some examples of that support?
Well, one example is the Portable Skidder Bridge Rental Initiative.
Okay, portable skidder bridges.
Yeah, so these bridges are essential for protecting stream beds.
Right, we talked about those.
Right, but they can be expensive for loggers.
So this initiative makes them more affordable.
Exactly, yeah, it reduces the financial burden.
I like that.
Yeah, and it encourages wider adoption.
That's great.
It's a good example of how we can overcome those financial barriers
Yeah.
and promote sustainable practices.
Now let's step back for a minute.
Okay.
Why should our listeners, those mid-career professionals,
Yeah.
why should they care about all this AMP stuff?
Well, it comes down to this. AMPs are a model for how we can balance economic activity with environmental protection.
So it's not just about logging. It's about doing business the right way.
Exactly. And that's important for all industries.
And it's getting more important with climate change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So AMPs are a good example.
Yeah, they show that we can adapt to a changing environment and still be good stewards of the environment.
Right.
And that's relevant for anyone thinking about the future of their career,
Their industry.
their industry, and the planet.
And that's why we're talking about it today.
Exactly.
We want to help you understand these issues
Yeah.
and the solutions.
Right.
It's about, helping you make informed decisions.
That benefit both your career and the environment.
They don't have to be separate.
Right.
We can have a thriving economy and a healthy environment.
If we're willing to adapt and innovate and collaborate.
And AMPs are a framework for doing that.
Exactly.
Okay, so climate change is a big reason for the evolution of AMPs.
Uh-huh.
But it's not just about reacting to those changes. It's about thinking ahead
Right.
and being proactive.
Yeah.
What are some ways the industry is doing that?
That's a good point. And it's great to see the industry being proactive. Like, one example is the focus on climate-smart forestry.
Climate-smart forestry.
Yeah, it's about managing forests in a way that reduces the impacts of climate change, but also helps them absorb carbon.
Oh, so it's about fighting climate change with forests.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And AMPs are important for that by protecting water quality and minimizing soil disturbance. They help keep the forests healthy.
So the forests can be more resilient.
Right, exactly. And beyond the practices themselves, the industry is starting to see that AMPs aren't just a set of rules.
Yeah.
They're a framework for continuous improvement.
So it's not just checking boxes.
Right.
It's about always trying to do better.
Exactly. And being adaptable, with the changing climate.
Okay, now we've talked about collaboration.
Uh-huh.
How does that play out in practice with AMPs?
Well, it starts with the development of the AMPs.
Okay.
A lot of different people are involved, so the guidelines are practical and protective.
So it's not just the government telling everyone what to do.
Right. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone.
And that collaboration continues when the AMPs are being implemented.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. A lot of states have AMP forester programs.
Right, we talked about those.
Yeah. And they provide technical assistance to loggers and landowners. So it's about sharing knowledge.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of informal collaboration, too. Loggers share information with each other.
Right.
They work with landowners to figure out, specific challenges.
It's like a community.
It is, yeah. Everyone working together.
It seems like AMPs are about more than just water quality.
Yeah.
It's a whole new way of thinking about how we manage our forests.
It is. It's about sustainability.
Yeah.
And that's becoming more and more important for the forest products industry.
So it's not just about taking from the forest.
Right.
It's about taking care of it.
Exactly.
And AMPs are a part of that.
They are.
And that's driven by, a genuine understanding that protecting the environment is good for business.
Exactly. The health of the industry depends on the health of the forests.
And that's true for any industry that uses natural resources.
Absolutely.
And it's especially important now with climate change.
Yeah. That's why we're talking about it today.
On the FBS podcast.
Right. We want to help mid-career professionals, like you understand these things.
So you can make good decisions.
That benefit your career and the environment.
It's about giving you the knowledge and the insights you need.
Exactly. And as we continue, we'll look at how AMPs are being used around the country and talk about the challenges and the successes.
So it's really cool to see how these AMPs are like shaping the future of forestry.
Yeah.
But I imagine, with any kind of evolving practice, there are always like discussions and debates about, the best way to put them into practice.
Right.
What are some of the key areas where those conversations are happening?
Well, one area is the balance between prescription and flexibility in the AMPs.
Prescription and flexibility.
Yeah. So some people want more like strict rules.
Okay.
Leaving less room for, interpretation, while others want a more adaptable approach, something that allows for, site-specific considerations.
Oh, okay. So it's like that classic, tension.
Right.
Standardization versus customization. What are the arguments like on each side?
Okay, so those who want stricter rules, they argue that it ensures everyone's kind of doing things the same way.
Right.
To the same standard.
Okay, yeah.
And that protects water quality. They worry that too much flexibility could lead to inconsistencies.
Yeah, and that could compromise the water.
Exactly. And it makes it easier to monitor and enforce.
Right, if there's like a clear rule.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Now, on the other hand, those who want more flexibility, they argue that a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work everywhere.
Okay.
Sites can be very different.
Yeah.
And an adaptable approach allows you to tailor those practices.
To the specific conditions.
Right, exactly. So like a logging operation in a steep mountain area might need different practices than one in a flatter area.
Exactly. And they argue that, allowing for that flexibility, it can actually lead to better protection.
Okay, yeah.
Because the practices are more appropriate.
To the specific site.
Exactly.
So it's a really nuanced discussion.
It is.
And it shows the need for that dialogue.
Yeah.
And working together, to find that balance between those two priorities.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, another area that's often talked about is the cost of AMPs.
Yeah.
We've talked about how important it is to support the industry in making those changes.
Right.
But there are, concerns about the cost.
Right.
To put those practices in place.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with that?
Well, implementing AMPs can cost money for loggers.
Okay.
Things like new equipment or changing harvesting schedules.
Yeah, makes sense.
And those costs can be especially tough for smaller operations.
Or those working on, tight margins.
Yeah.
So it's important to recognize that and trying to make things easier.
Right. Find ways to help.
Yeah.
We talked about the portable skidder bridge rentals.
Right.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
But we need to keep looking for creative solutions.
Exactly.
To help the industry, handle those costs.
Yeah.
And make those, changes more affordable.
Right. You want to make those sustainable practices make sense financially, too.
Right. Exactly.
And that might involve a lot of different things like government incentives,
Okay.
industry initiatives, maybe market-based solutions.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that protecting the environment and being profitable.
Right. That they can coexist.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where the conversation needs to continue. How do we make a system that encourages sustainable practices, rewards innovation, makes sure the industry can thrive, and also protect our resources?
So it's a tough challenge.
It is.
But it's one we got to figure out.
Yeah, we have to.
If we want a sustainable future.
Right.
For, everyone, the industry, the environment.
Exactly.
And those conversations, they're happening.
Oh, they are, yeah, all over the country.
Okay.
People are working to improve AMPs, explore new technologies, develop new ways to finance these changes.
That's really encouraging.
It is.
To see that people are, working on this.
Yeah. And it shows that AMPs aren't just about rules.
Right.
They're about creating a culture of, always doing better, working together, and being responsible.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into AMPs, I want to, bring it back to our listeners.
Right.
Those mid-career professionals out there.
Yeah.
What's the one big thing we want them to take away from all this?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that AMPs aren't just for loggers.
Okay.
They're an example of how we can manage our resources as the world changes. They're about adapting, innovating, collaborating, and that's important for everyone, any career.
So AMPs are like, a model.
Yeah, a model for how to approach challenges,
Yeah.
find solutions, and work together.
Yeah, to create a better future.
Exactly.
And for those mid-career folks out there, this means, taking those principles
Yeah.
and using them in their own work.
Right. Thinking about sustainability in their decisions,
Yeah.
being proactive, looking for opportunities to learn and adapt,
Yeah.
and come up with new ideas.
Because sustainability is not just, good for the environment.
Right.
It's good for business.
It is.
It's how you stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
And if you're engaged, if you're learning,
Yeah.
you can be a leader in making those changes happen.
Yeah.
It's really exciting to think about.
It is.
Yeah, all the positive change that can happen.
Yeah.
When we work together, use our knowledge,
Uh-huh.
and, and care for the environment.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really great deep dive
It has.
into AMPs.
Yeah.
We encourage you to, keep learning about this stuff.
Yeah.
Keep the conversation going.
Mm-hmm.
Be a part of, making a difference.
Yeah.
The challenges are out there,
They are.
but so are the opportunities.
That's of them.
Hey, this is Steve Bick with the Forest Business School. Thanks for listening to the FBS podcast, and I hope you will subscribe. The truth is, these deep dives barely scratch the surface of some of the topics we cover in the Forest Business School programs, and the podcast is a way of reaching a wider audience. Check out my website at vtfbs.com for more information. Reach out if you want to talk about one of the FBS programs or have custom training or project needs that you'd like to discuss. Again, thanks for listening to the FBS podcast.